I'm here next to one of my favorite shrubs of the shrub steppe, the mock orange. Now, it doesn't come from a big family, at least not that we'll study in Washington State, but it has this distinctive characteristic that its leaves are opposite each other. Not super common, we've run into it before, but this is just a group of plants that all have opposite leaves. They just share that in common, even though they come from a lot of different families. So let's take a look at some of the plants that are kind of these stray ones with opposite leaves.
So here are a few examples from around the state. Now, all of these plants actually used to be in the same family, the honeysuckle family, but they've been split up based on newer genetic evidence. You'll see that they all look somewhat similar, although maybe not the one on the right. Kind of a difficult view there. But let's take a look at a few more. All of these, in terms of plant family tree, happen to be in this eudicot branch, but they're in very different families. First one being snowberry. So this one is still in the honeysuckle family, and it's a really pretty one. If you know honeysuckles, you probably see the resemblance. This one is a good-sized shrub, up to chest high. It likes these areas with a lot of light in the forest. You'll find it in usually pretty dense thickets because it'll spread by the seeds from these little white berries, where obviously it gets its name from, but also it spreads by underground rhizomes, those underground stems that spread and then send up new stems. As we said before, the leaves are opposite. So here's one leaf and it attaches to the branch right there, and another one right opposite it. The leaves are often oval shaped, but they're really, really variable on this species. All the ones here look fairly uniform, but it's not uncommon to find one with big, crazy lobes on it as well. So even on the same plant, don't count on the leaf shape to tell you what this is. The snowy berries are going to give it away. But some of these just cute little flowers with 5 petals arranged in a tube, usually hanging down like little bells, and they're white or pink. So there's snowberry for you. A close cousin, I guess, in a slightly different family is the twin flower. It does have opposite leaves. We can probably best see that maybe right down here on the stem. And as the name suggests on this plant, twin flowers. One of the only plants I know of that sends up this flowering stalk and always just has this Y-shaped branch with 2 flowers. Looks very, very much like the snowberry flowers as well. And this one, kind of like the snowberries, sends out runners, right? So this one above the ground, so these are stolons, and they'll root at different places and then send up little flowering stalks of their own. It's hard to tell from this picture, but these stems, at least the ones at the base, are woody. So technically, it's a very, very small shrub. And has evergreen leaves, if you believe it. You usually find it in pretty organic soil with lots of leaf litter, usually in the forest, tolerates shade pretty well, and you see it really commonly along the trail. It's a nice friend to keep you company while you're out hiking. Another one you'll find in the forest pretty commonly, but really just scattered here and there, not really abundant, is the blue elderberry. Kind of a big, messy shrub in a way. And it does have opposite leaves, just like all the ones we're looking at here. So on this bottom picture, here's the main stem, and then it has a leaf coming out here and another one coming out here. So they're opposite each other, but this time they're compound leaves. Each of their leaflets has this lanceolate shape to it, and there's usually 5 to 9 of those leaflets. So pretty easy to recognize. Plus they have hollow stems, which is actually where they get their name, believe it or not. Elderberry actually comes from an Anglo-Saxon word elder, which means to kindle, like kindle a fire, because they have hollow stems and you can blow through them like a straw to get a fire going. So I found that interesting when I looked that one up. The flowers come in these big flat top clusters, lots and lots of tiny little flowers with 5 petals, and you'll see them scattered all around on the shrub. Sometimes they produce berries and sometimes they don't, but what I see commonly is just some years one plant will produce this huge bumper crop of berries, and they turn blue as they ripen, and the shrub just hangs with them. They weigh it down so much that all the branches are bent over, and wildlife love these berries. They just go crazy over them. People, not so much. They're not really tasty when they're fresh. They're better when they're dried or cooked. The people even do make elderberry wine. There's quite a few different species of elderberry, but this is probably one of the more common ones that you'll run into around central Washington. You'll even find it down into the shrub steppe in valleys where there's a little more moisture. I somewhat more commonly see it in the forested areas. And now for a plant that's really completely different, the stinging nettle. And as its name suggests, this is a good one to know. Some people like to find it because they eat it, cooked, obviously, but a good one to know so you don't run into it. It does have on all the parts of it, leaves, stems, you name it, these stinging hairs. They're like little hypodermic needles that inject a variety of chemicals into the skin, and they hurt pretty bad for about a half hour or so. It wears off. It's not poisonous, but it is unpleasant. So good one to know. So let's talk about how you would recognize it. It's a big plant. These things grow probably a good 8 feet tall if they're really healthy, but at least waist high, depending on the time of year. They're an herbaceous plant, and so they lose their leaves. You can see it turning yellow over here on the right. In the fall, the whole stem dies back and they just go back to underground rhizomes. You usually find them in areas that are disturbed. Streamsides, roadsides, trails, graded areas, old fields. They really love that sort of stuff. They spread both by seeds and by their underground rhizomes, so usually you find them in thickets. Their leaves are pretty distinctive. Not only are they opposite, and maybe we can see that best here, there's one leaf and another one coming this direction, but very, very distinctly opposite, but these toothy margins look like saw teeth. So not just serrated, but they're toothy, sometimes called dentate. And the leaves are distinctly lanceolate shaped, much like a willow leaf in a way. So there's a few tips for recognizing. One other interesting thing about the plant is it comes in separate male plants and female plants. They actually separate the sexes. They're wind pollinated. You can tell the flowers just droop down here out of the leaf axils, the base of the leaf. And I believe this one on the right is female, and the one on the left may be male, but I don't have a close enough shot to tell for sure. But just wind pollinated, and nothing too exciting to see there. But nutritious and dangerous both. An interesting combination. Another group that, again, very different, but opposite leaves, we can see that down here, is the penstemons. So this is a diverse group, and you are likely to see penstemons in a garden somewhere, but just as likely to go out and find it on a hike. So they grow in a variety of habitats, but I tend to find them most among the rocks. They do really well there, especially obviously the rock penstemon. You see it growing here by some stone crops that we saw before, right there in the rocks with not much else growing. And it's a beautiful plant when it blooms. So they have these tubular flowers and kind of an interesting arrangement of stamens and pistils inside of there that curve around. The flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, so they have a right and a left side when you kind of divide them in half there. But the plants themselves can be shrubby. Very often they're perennial herbs, very low to the ground, and lots of flowers with always a colorful display of some sort. So there's the rock penstemon, but there are others as well that I couldn't help showing. They're hard to resist taking pictures of, but a big variety from fuchsia to blue to violet of these penstemons. So a great one to enjoy when the wildflowers are out. Another plant with opposite leaves that you're likely to encounter is the red osier dogwood. Now, the term osier usually refers to willow or a willow branch, and these grow in kind of similar areas. They grow right by the water, and fed by that water, they grow really tall and lush, usually about an 8-foot tall shrub. And what gives them away is that these really bright red stems show up really easily. So thus the name red osier. They're dogwood, just like flowering dogwoods. They have much more unassuming flowers in the same sort of flat top cluster with just 4 petals. So that kind of makes them distinctive as well, with 4 petals instead of 5 in the dicot group. You can see here they're deciduous in my little drawing, and they grow overhead high most of the time that I see them, with a lot of stems coming out of the ground. What else about these guys? So their leaves are ovate in shape, and it's kind of wide lanceolate, and they have several veins that are indented and kind of arch up toward the tip. They have another interesting feature is when you pull apart the leaf kind of gently, they leave these little strands from their veins, because they have really elastic fibers in there that'll actually hold the 2 halves of the leaves together, just kind of hanging there. So that's one way to confirm that that's what you have if you have a nice fresh leaf. So there's red osier dogwood. Another 4-petaled plant that has to be one of my favorite plants of all time is the mock orange. So 4 white petals, just like before. This one's in the hydrangea family, just like the hydrangeas you might grow in your yard with the big showy puffball flowers. But this one's my favorite for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think any plant has any business growing flowers this beautiful in an environment this harsh. You'll find it in the pretty harsh areas of the shrub steppe, sometimes down in canyons, but very often up in the hillsides. And when it's healthy, it gets a good 6 to 8 feet tall, so it's a good sized shrub. It's really unassuming if you look at this bottom photo here most times of the year, but come June, when it's ready to flower, it produces these white flowers, which are the other part of what makes it my favorite, is that they smell just like oranges, and that's where it gets its name. I grew up in Southern California, and we had orange trees in the yard, so it's this distinctive part of my memory, those smells of the orange blossoms. And these are, if not spot on, a really good knockoff of orange blossoms. And so that smell just takes me back to my childhood and eating oranges off the tree. Could almost taste them now just thinking about it. The leaves are opposite, like everything in this group. Kind of like the last one, the red osier dogwood. They have these ovate leaves, but just with these 3 main veins kind of arcing toward the tip. So if you don't have flowers and you want to try to identify it, there it is. And it has the tiniest little seeds. I've tried to grow these guys from seed with limited success so far, but these capsules let out tons and tons of these tiny, tiny seeds. Hard to imagine how a plant this big and lush and hardy can grow from a seed so tiny, but there they are. Another plant, kind of like the mock orange, that reminds us that you can find beauty anywhere, even in harsh environments, is phlox. And there's a lot of species of phlox in the Pacific Northwest. You may very well have one growing in your yard or your neighbor's yard near you. They're a very popular landscaping plant as well, and many of those species come from the Pacific Northwest. These guys grow anywhere from the harsh rocky hillsides of the shrub steppe all the way up to alpine environments. A lot of different varieties here. They do have opposite leaves. They're pretty small. The vegetation's kind of unassuming, so they have these narrow leaves that come out opposite one another. Most of these plants are herbaceous plants like this guy that don't come up much taller than your hiking boots. Some are small shrubs that make it not quite up to maybe mid-shin. A lot of times white flowers, lavender, very often pink as well. They have this tubular appearance, so they grow in a tube that flares out, kind of reminds me of the bell of a trombone at the top. Very often in the middle here, you can see on the photo on the right, these little anthers poking right down there in the middle of the tube. So there's phlox, a really beautiful plant with just a nearly obscene number of flowers when it blooms in the spring, just painting entire hillsides. Hard not to enjoy the phlox, and you understand why you see it so often in people's yards. Our last plant in this opposite leaf group is the false box, from yet another family, the bittersweet family. This one has opposite leaves as well, which you can see really distinctly up here in this upper right photo. Just very simple, glossy, evergreen leaves that are oval in shape and come out opposite each other on the stem with hardly any petiole at all. There's just not much of a leaf stalk there. And these are really unassuming shrubs of the forest. Here's one you can tell is growing by a stream on the left, but you'll see them just about anywhere in the forest. Seldom much above knee high, and really not showy flowers. Here's one in full bloom in the bottom here. See those flowers coming out. Really tiny flowers. It reminds people of the boxwood, which is a common landscaping plant, just kind of a generic shrub. And this one looks a lot like that, thus the name false box. It is related to another common landscaping plant, which is the spindle tree or burning bush that we grow a lot around the valley here in Yakima. And so it's a relative of that one. This one, I guess, is gaining some popularity as a landscaping plant, but for the most part is just kind of this background shrubbery of the forest. So if you want to really impress your friends on your next hike, say, oh, look at that, it's a false box. Well, I don't know if that'll impress them or not, but I hope you enjoyed learning about a diverse group of plants that all happen to have the same feature of opposite leaves. As always, happy botanizing.